In section 5 of your practical guide, you learned how to fit a multiplicative model to a time series dataset which has both a trend and a seasonal component. This video continues with that work and shows you how to simplify some of the steps involved using the AVERAGEIF and VLOOKUP functions. Now, I've already done our full quarter moving average values in the column E, and I've calculated the centered moving averages in column F. This was done using the exact approach given in the practical guide. Our next step is to calculate the seasonal irregular components, and we do that by taking the time series value and dividing it by the centered moving average for the corresponding period. We then need to go and copy our formula down. So I'm doing that by highlighting both the cell with my formula as well as the empty cell below it, so that when I copy my formula down, it will include the empty cells in between. It's not going to try and calculate a value where we have no values available. So our next step after this would be to calculate the average seasonal irregular values. We can do that by averaging the values manually, or we can use the AVERAGEIF function. Now, if we wanted to do this manually, we would have to go and look for all the quarter threes and go and average their values using the average function. Do the same for quarter 4, 1, and 2. That can be quite time consuming if you have a very large data set. So we are going to do this in a simpler manner, using this AVERAGEIF function, which is very similar to the SUMIF function we used earlier this semester. So our first step is to calculate or specify the range in which we want to look for our criteria, and that's going to be column B, which contains all the different quarters. Then the next thing we need to specify is our criteria. So I'm going to calculate the average for all the quarter 1 values. So I'm clicking here on cell K3. And then lastly, we need to specify which values to average. If we don't, it's going to average the values in the same range that we specified, which we don't want to do. So we want to go and average the seasonal irregular components. So now it's going to look for all of the values in column B that are equal to 1, go find the corresponding value in column G and average those. So if we do that, this is our seasonal irregular value, or the average of the seasonal irregular value. So I can now copy this down, and when I do this, I can go double check, and we can see, yes, this function is still checking column B, averaging the values in column G, and the criteria in this case is now quarter 4, so it is working correctly. It's always a good idea to go and check that your formulas are doing what you expect them to do, that you haven't forgotten to lock onto a value that you might need to lock onto. In this case, we didn't need to do that. So now we want to go and check if these averaged values correspond to the number of time periods that we included. So we want this to sum up to 4, and if we check, we see it doesn't sum up to 4. So we need to go and adjust these values and get the adjusted seasonal indices. And we do this by taking each value, dividing it by the total of all these indices. And I'm going to lock onto it in this case, so that when I copy my formula down, I'm always dividing by the 4.03, etc. And we are going to multiply it by 4 so that it becomes a value out of 4. So when I do this, I can copy my formula down again. Let's just check that we've done this correctly. And we can see we are dividing the correct value by the correct value. We haven't copied incorrectly. So now if we go check, we can see these values will sum up to 4. So we can use these. Our next step would be to take these seasonal indices, the adjusted values, and place them in column H. We can do this manually and copy and paste, but it's easy to make a mistake, and again, with a large data set, it's going to be very time consuming. So this is where the VLOOKUP function comes in. So the VLOOKUP function will be looking for the value 1, so it wants to go and find the value in column B, and it will look for it in this table here on the right hand side. Now, what's important to remember with the VLOOKUP function is that it will look for the value you've specified in the first column of the range that you're specifying. So if I had put my quarter values in a second or a third column that I'm highlighting, let's say I highlighted column J as well, the function won't know what to do. So we need to make sure that the thing we're looking for is in the first column. Now I'm going to lock onto this as well, this range, because when I copy my formula down, I always want to look in that specific table. The next argument is the value that needs to be returned. So the column index number just specifies in this range where I'm doing my lookup, which value it needs to return to me. Now, my value is in column M in the big data set, but that doesn't matter. In the highlighted range, it is in column 3, so that is why I am entering the value 3 there. Now the last argument just tells it what to look for. Should it look for an approximate match or an exact match? We always want to choose the exact match option, otherwise you are going to get random values returned to you. So when this is done, we can see, yes, it recognized we're in quarter 1, so this is the index to return. So I'm again going to copy this formula down using the cell with the formula as well as the empty cell below it. So when I do that, it will go and look for all of these values. And you can see, if I check this last one, it is looking for quarter 4 in that specific range that I wanted, and it's returning the value in column 3. So everything is working correctly. Now we want to go calculate our deseasonalized values so that we can go do our trend line. And we do that by taking the original time series value and dividing that by the adjusted seasonal index, and that gives me my adjusted or my deseasonalized value. So when I copy this down again exactly the same way as before, we will find all of our deseasonalized values. Now this we can use to fit a trend line, but before we can do this, we need to assign time points to each of these values. So my first value was at time point 1, the second value at time point 2, third value at time point 3, and so on. So I'm going to highlight all of this and copy these down as well. And you can see we now have time points assigned to each of these quarters. So we need that to be able to fit a trend line. So the trend line we can fit using the scatter plot tool and then adding a trend line to our graph, or we can use the slope and intercept functions available in Excel. So to do that, I'm going to just type here equals slope, and then first I need to enter my y values. That's my first argument, so those are the values in column I, and then I can add in my time point, so these are my x values. So when I do that, it returns my slope immediately. The same can be done to get the intercept values for my trend line. So again, just the y values first, which are my deseasonalized values, and then the different time points are my x values. And when I do that, I have my slope and intercept values, which I can now use to calculate or forecast a deseasonalized trend value, which I can then multiply by the corresponding seasonal index to get my forecasted value.